Hi, and welcome to this episode of English with Matthew, where today we're going to talk about paragraphing. This may seem kind of basic, but I'm often surprised at how many people don't really discipline their paragraphs very well, and it makes a big difference with the impact of your writing. Plus, I think it really helps with the psychology of writing. If you ever feel like this when you're sitting down to type, presumably not at a typewriter, but you just feel like you can't get your ideas organized, you're not sure where to start, thinking in terms of paragraphs really can help and could possibly restore your sanity when you have an assignment due. So here's somebody who looks all nice, neat, and tidy, and they've got their little paragraphs organized there. I want to point out, I don't think those paragraphs are long enough, but we're going to talk about that in a second here. So let's start by remembering what we were told in high school or at GCSE about paragraphs. And some people put it this way: you need to have a point, you need to have some evidence, and you need to have an explanation. And this is a cliche about paragraphs, but I think it's useful to remember. It really helps us think about what the purpose of a paragraph is, and that is it needs to center around one argumentative point, ideally. Okay? So, you notice here I said, especially the fact that each paragraph must center around one point and one point only, and I've used a little symbol there which means paragraph, so it just keeps me from having to type out the word paragraph again and again. That's an editor symbol meaning paragraph. So first off, what we learned from this PEE thing is that no one sentence paragraph can do all this stuff. So right there, go through your assignment and take out all the one sentence paragraphs and look at what that needs to be put in their place. We can't have a one sentence paragraph that makes a point and provides evidence and discusses how that evidence relates to the point and explains it. Can't do all that in one sentence. Okay, second point is a two-sentence paragraph can't do this either. Okay, so no two-sentence paragraphs. And yeah, you're right, no three-sentence paragraphs. If you're writing an academic essay that is all about developing an argument and basing it on evidence, paragraphs have a lot of work to do. And I'm going to urge you to make your paragraphs longer, but to keep them focused on one point. That may seem a bit contradictory, but that's the path we're trying to go down. Keep the focus narrow and probe in depth within each paragraph. Okay, so that's why I'm suggesting those paragraphs look a little short to me. Okay, so even though we're writing longer paragraphs, each paragraph must center around one point and one point only. Keep that in mind. So you make a first point in the first paragraph, second point in the second one, third point in the third paragraph, fourth in the fourth. Now, here's an example here. Look at this paragraph that starts with this one point. It says, the prevalence of reported ASDs, that is autism spectrum disorder, has increased in recent years. Now, that's the topic sentence of the paragraph. That's the main point it wants to make. Everything that follows has to talk about that increase, okay? Because that is the argument that paragraph is making. Now, I'm being very extreme with these guidelines. I know that. Lots of people do paragraphs different ways, but I'm talking about the problems I see in my student writing where their paragraphs are chaotic. And this is a good exercise to go through to try to stick to that topic sentence and keep your whole paragraph focused. Okay. Now, it's not the most exciting topic sentence. Okay. Reported ASDs have increased in recent years. That's a fairly simple and unexciting paragraph to write. Nonetheless, you'd be amazed at how difficult some people would find it to stay on that topic. If I was reading an essay that had that as its first sentence, I wouldn't be that surprised if somewhere in that paragraph I saw, oh, and hyperactivity and ADD is a common diagnosed behavioral disorder that begins early in childhood. It's like, whoa, sorry, are we just listing facts now? Or are we trying to build an argument? Okay. So although it may not look that exciting, if you look at it in depth, and that is the purpose of an academic essay, is to look at things in depth, you'll notice some key words in that topic sentence. The prevalence of reported ASDs. There's kind of an implied difference there perhaps between the number of people with an actual diagnosis and the number of people, or the actual condition and the number of people who achieve a diagnosis. So there may be a difference there. And also, we want to focus on the increase in recent years. And we'll have to explain, do we mean quite recent, and do we mean that's a sharp increase that's been different from earlier years? Why is that? There is actually a fair bit to talk about in this one sentence. Now, we could push for a more complex topic sentence. So here we have the prevalence of reported ASDs has increased in recent years, demonstrating the need for improved understanding and treatments. Okay, so now the argument is about the urgency of changes required to care. Okay, that is a kind of double-barreled argument. Based on the increase, we need a change in policy and behavior. That certainly could occupy you for a whole paragraph. Because now we've got the idea of improved understanding that we have to unpack. What's implied by that? And treatment. What kinds of treatments are we talking about? So the fact is, there's quite a bit here to discuss in that one sentence. We need to give some evidence. We have to explain how the evidence connects to the argument. You suddenly realize, wow, paragraphs have a lot of work to do. We don't have time to start throwing in random facts. So the PEE thing is a safe, reliable bet for writers whose paragraphing is perhaps unsteady and unfocused generally. Have a look at some recent essays of your own and double check the paragraphs and see if they're sticking to one point. PEE enforces argumentative discipline. It makes you stick to the point. It forces you to provide evidence for your argument, which in itself is a difficult task. What evidence are you going to put forward to back this up? And it also demands, because of the last E, the explanation part, that you don't just drop the evidence into the paragraph and walk away. You have to go on and say, let me explain in detail how the evidence connects to my point. I compare this to like a lawyer bringing evidence into a courtroom and saying, there you go, there's the evidence, figure it out. No. They would have to go through and say, let me demonstrate exactly how this backs up my case. Okay, so here's something you definitely don't want to do. You get that opening topic sentence, prevalence of reported ASDs, we need improved understanding and treatment, and now we're going to throw in our first piece of evidence, a quotation. About one in 54 children has been identified with autism spectrum disorder, according to estimates from CDC's Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring, ADM network. Okay, now my main point about this is, look what happens next. It's the start of a new paragraph. I just wrote, and here I am going off on a new paragraph, leaving that piece of evidence hanging at the end of a previous paragraph. No, you always need to follow up evidence or quotations with a discussion or analysis that links the evidence back to the point that you're trying to make. Otherwise, you're just like the lawyer in the courtroom who's leaving the evidence and then taking off and not explaining it, as if to say, I didn't really understand how the evidence supported my case. I'm hoping the jury can figure it all out. That's not the way a lawyer would work. Okay, so I call that a hanging quotation or a hanging piece of evidence. Okay, and what's interesting about this is you don't even need to be reading the text necessarily. Just look at the structure of that. I've put in kind of nonsense language there, and you can see there's a paragraph, an indented quotation of some sort, and then a new paragraph. You know that's a hanging quotation. That essay has a problem from my point of view, and it's worth looking at closely. Okay, that's the thing you're looking for right there, the hanging quotation. So if you think like a lawyer when you're writing your essay, you have to enter the court. That's starting the paragraph. You make your plea, you know, on behalf of your client. You display the evidence. Here's Exhibit A, and then you explain to the jury in detail why it backs up the central argument you are making. So this is a lawyer behaving the way they're supposed to be. Let me spell this out to you very clearly. And the reason is because some of your readers won't get it. You know, it may be obvious to you, but you've been working on this for a while. You need to explain it to a beginner. Now, the fact is there are more advanced writers out there who can develop more sophisticated ways of doing all these jobs that are required by a paragraph. But the fact is those jobs still need done. So you may move up beyond doing PEE every time because that can become clunky and repetitive. I mean, if you look at this chart, you can see how for evidence. This is shown, this can be seen, this is demonstrated. You know, you wouldn't want to be repeating that phrasing every time you try to introduce a piece of evidence. Or when you start the explanation, you don't want to be saying, this shows, this suggests, this implies. So there are more sophisticated ways to weave a paragraph together. But my point is, they're still going to make a point. They're still going to provide evidence somewhere, and they're still going to try to explain that evidence. If you want to look at an excellent explanation for beginners as to how you can begin to move on to a more fluid, efficient, less repetitive style of paragraphing, like if you really have this down, don't move on too quickly. There's a great guy, Mr. Salz Teaches English. He's got a brilliant video that really pushes students beyond the PEE, and he talks about working with embedded quotations, and it really makes for a more fluent style. But my purpose in this video is to say, listen, at the very least, keep your paragraphs focused on one point, okay? So it is possible, as he points out, to weave assertions, evidence, and explanations into longer sentences, and he actually makes the really good point that it makes you more efficient and reduces your word count. But it also requires very careful attention to syntax, that is the structure of your sentences, and I'm putting together a video on syntax, so as soon as that goes up, have a look at that as well. So I'm also putting together a video on what I call paragraph outlining, which is a way to revise your essays and to examine your paragraphing. Have a look at that when it goes up, and you can use that to review your essay to see how successful your paragraphing has been. So thank you for joining me in this episode of English with Matthew and joining in the fight against disorganized and underdeveloped paragraphs. And I hope to see you again real soon. Thank you much.